Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and I have for you something a bit different today. Thrift Store Horror is my collaborator on the channel. I use them for resources on what to read next and how to get books that I'm missing. And in some cases, I'm tracking down the wrong book entirely because it's the UK release and I already have the United States release. Anyway, recommendation was 13 Tales of Horror by 13 Masters of Horror. This is a compilation novel. It's all short stories. I have not read this before, but it came highly recommended by Thrift Store Horror. So we have stories by R.L. Stine, Caroline B. Cooney, Christopher Pike, D.E. Atkins, A. Bates, J. Bennett, Carol Ellis, Diane Ho, Lael Littke, Sinclair Smith, J.B. Stamper, Ellen Emerson White, and Patricia Windsor. Half of these authors have worked with Scholastic and Point Horror in the past. This should be pretty fun. And we all know about R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, right? Believe it or not, I haven't really read any Diane Ho, or Sinclair Smith, or Caroline B. Cooney, but I do have a Cooney novel in the works, so stay tuned for that. I will be reading one story from this compilation and then publishing that as its own episode. I'm going to use this book like glue. If there's any holes or gaps or weirdness going on in my schedule, I'll be using one of these stories to fill that void. Just something fun to do. So let's begin. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the join button to show your support. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me narrate them a story. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of A Little Taste of Death by Patricia Windsor. Louis had taken to reading the newspaper at breakfast every morning. She woke to the sound of it hitting Gran's front porch at 8 o'clock. At that moment her day began, and the paper was there to help the morning pass. It was a flimsy newspaper, nothing like the Atlanta newspaper her daddy read every morning. The DeLongo Morning Press took less than 20 minutes if Louis read real slow. The classifieds could stretch it out a little more. Breakfast was served in the dining room, complete with linen cloth and napkins. You had to refold a napkin into its silver holder for the next meal. You had to be careful not to wipe your mouth too vigorously, or your napkin would be filthy before the week was out. Gran, frail and refined, didn't say much in the morning. It took time to get her motor started, she said. Gran sat at the other end of the table, staring out the window at her garden. She didn't read the DeLongo Morning Press until the afternoon. She had instructed Louis to fold it back up as neatly as the napkins. And Louis had perfected the technique of running her fingernail across the creases to make them look fresh. The first thing Louis read in the classified section was the funeral notices, mostly for the old people. After that came lost and found pets. Louis's heart ached over these. She memorized descriptions of the dogs and cats just in case one might stray into the garden or cross her path on the street. After that were ads for jobs, like home typist or experienced waitress. Then came used cars, real estate, and finally the personals. Remember the lollipop Louis read this morning, the man in a white hat? Louis sat up straighter and squinted at the fine print. Those who remembered were asked to call a local number immediately. It could save your life. A shivery feeling crept over Louis. She looked up, thinking the sun had gone behind a cloud. The garden was brilliant in yellow morning light. Louis read the ad again. Well, it's just a joke, she thought. What was wrong with taking a lollipop? Certainly not a matter of life and death. For the first time, Louis did not finish reading the paper to the end. She put it down in an untidy heap. She sat for a moment. It was funny how the telephone number kept repeating in her head. She did a quick calculation. More than 10 years ago it must have been. Was there some kind of poison that took 10 years to work? Or maybe it was a cancer recall, the way they did with cars. Louis, dear, Gran said tenderly, do ask to be excused. This meant she'd been fidgeting. Sorry? And? Gran gestured at the messy newspaper. Yes, Gran, yes, Louis said, suddenly impatient. She took the paper away with her and went into the other room. The day was interminable. There was nothing to do in DeLongo except sit in the garden drinking colas and reading the books she had borrowed from the library. She didn't know anybody. She couldn't talk much to Gran, who was mostly distracted and vague, although at night she pepped up some. Louis hadn't wanted to spend a summer in DeLongo, but she had promised not to complain, even to herself. Her parents deserved their anniversary vacation, and Louis would not spoil it. but now she felt as if she might jump out of her skin. The trouble was, aside from refolding newspapers and linen napkins, there was nothing she had to do. She suddenly wished Gran was a cranky old lady who made her mop floors and wash windows. Instead, there was Clara in the kitchen and Ned in the garden, and any number of other people Gran called in to do chores. Gran's idea of work was embroidering pillow covers. Louie was helpless at that. She went out to the garden and came back in again. She walked into the hall and looked at the black, old-fashioned telephone sitting on its stand. Why did she keep remembering the number? It was as if they were asking her to dial it. Finally, she did. She expected to hear some idiotic recording trying to sell her something. Instead, a businesslike male voice said, "Can I help you?" Louie stifled a screechy laugh. Your ad? How old are you?" Her age was on the tip of her tongue, but she held it back. "Why?" There was no answer from the other end. 15, Louie said, defeated. "That's about right. How are you feeling these days? Any symptoms?" "What kind of symptoms? What's this all about?" "There's a meeting Thursday night." He gave her an address. "Why don't you come?" "Why should I?" "It could make a difference," the voice said, overriding Louie's attempt at more questions. "Really, it's in your best interest. Maybe you haven't noticed any changes yet, but you will. When you ate that lollipop, you ate death." "Oh, sure," Louie said, and banged the receiver down. Gran, coming from the kitchen, looked at her curiously. Louie mumbled about a friend back home, and Gran went mildly on her way. "Doesn't know I'm alive," Louie thought with unexpected venom. Louie had no intention of going to the meeting. She was too smart to be suckered into schemes that were supposed to make you rich selling vitamins or kitchen cleaners door to door. She decided to help Ned in the garden and got a sunburned nose, which clinched it. She looked too ugly to go out, but on Thursday night, things conspired against her resolve. For one thing, her nose had healed. It wasn't even peeling. For another, Gran was going out herself. It was ladies' club night, and she fretted about leaving Louie on her own. Club nights were Clara's nights off. "I don't need a babysitter," Louie said. "But what will you do?" As if they did anything thrilling anyway, Louie thought. Gran didn't have a television. Usually she and Louie sat in the living room and read, unless Gran was peppy, and then they talked. "The same as usual. I've got my new library book." Gran looked uncertain. "Really," Louie said, her annoyance showing. "I'm not a child." Gran shrank back a little, and Louie felt sorry. She had never before raised her voice in this well-modulated household. She was about to apologize, but Gran obviously felt the matter was closed. At 7:30, she came into the living room to say goodbye. Louie was reading in her favorite chair. "Have a good time," she told Gran, and snuggled down. But as soon as she heard the front door click, she was full of nervous energy. As the phone number had done, the address pounded in her head and wouldn't quit. Easy to slip out. No one to ask where she was going. It wasn't far. Louie left the lights on and locked the door. She told herself she would walk over and take a look, just from the outside. She'd be back before Gran came home. The sun was disappearing behind the live oaks and sweet gum trees. Louie walked as fast as she could on the uneven brick streets. The address was on the border of what Gran would have called the unrefined section of town. Across the street, the houses were already squatter, the gardens less tended, a hint of backyard junk in the air. It was dark now, and Louie could comfortably stare without being seen from inside. It was in a storehouse, with cast-iron decorations. The iron balconies had leaked rust stains beneath the windows. Not a friendly house, Louie decided. "Are you going in?" a voice asked. Louie whirled around. "Didn't mean to scare you." A boy about her own age was standing there, greenish eyes darting from Louie to the windows and back. "Did you get a lollipop too?" Louie asked him, trying to make it sound funny. He nodded. "You look so serious," Louie told him, wishing he would laugh. "What is it all about, anyway?" "Let's go see." He took her hand and pulled her toward the curving iron staircase. Louie held back only a moment. "Well, if you're game, so am I," she said breezily, but her stomach churned. Inside, it looked like the kind of dull old meetings her parents had, to discuss building variances or sewage. People were sitting around on sofas and straight-backed chairs. They looked ordinary, about Louie's age, some a little younger, some older. One of the older ones was in charge. Louie guessed it was his house because he was offering sodas and coffee. He cleared his throat, and everyone quieted. "Hi, I'm James," he said, and Louie recognized the voice on the phone. "Hi, James," everyone said back. "I see we have 2 newcomers tonight." He nodded at Louie and the boy she'd come in with. "Let's introduce ourselves to them." All around the room they announced their own first names. Keith, Dawn, Mary Beth, Kurt, and Darrell. Louie gave her name reluctantly, then wished she'd made one up. The boy next to her was Bobby Lee. Okay, James said. Louie, Bobby Lee. We'd like to tell you about our experiences. That's what we do here. Share to give each other support. All of us have been called. Called. Louie stiffened at that word. If it was going to be some kind of revival meeting, with chest beating and hymns, she was leaving right now. She twisted around to look at the door, just to make sure it was there. She heard them start telling stories about bad feelings they had, nasty stuff they'd done. It didn't seem right to tell things so personal. Louie tried not to hear. Then she realized they were waiting on her. She felt her face getting red. I don't have anything to say. I mean, nothing like that. Just start at the beginning, hon, Dawn said. You know, tell us how you got your lollipop. No need to feel shy here. We're all in the same boat. Gloomy chuckles. But I don't know, Louie stammered. It was hard to remember it all. They had been on the train to Fayetteville to visit some relatives, she and her mama. Louie felt excited and proud. Mama dozed off, but Louie kept her eyes on the window, watching the scenery roll by, mostly trees, and, once in a while, a small town. The man had come up the aisle, swaying with the rolling motion of the train. He stopped at the double seat Mama and Louie shared. He smiled pleasantly at Louie. Louie smiled back. He reminded her of a good cowboy in a movie with his big white hat. He had twinkling green eyes, but she noticed that one of his front teeth was brown. Look what I've got for you, he exclaimed heartily, and handed Louie a big red lollipop. Oh, I'm not sure, Mama said, waking up. It's quite all right, ma'am, the man said, tipping his hat. Don't eat that, Mama whispered when he walked away. Louie knew all about not taking candy from strangers, but surely this was different? The lollipop looked fine, a brand she recognized, and it was all wrapped up, cherry-flavored too. Louie felt the inside of her mouth begin to water. Get rid of it. Stick it down there between the seats, Mama said, looking back over her shoulder, as if afraid to be seen rejecting the gift. Louie obeyed. But when Mama fell asleep again, she retrieved the lollipop and hid it in her jacket pocket. And later, in Fayetteville, when the relatives were busy talking to each other, she went outside and unwrapped the lollipop. It had tasted better than any other lollipop she had ever licked. Louie stopped, embarrassed to have been talking so long. How about you? She challenged Bobby Lee. Your turn next. She wanted to put him on the spot, but he jumped right in, telling a tale similar to her own. All of us here ate our lollipops too, James said. And now we've been called, and we're going through the change. You might not feel it yet, but when you do, don't be afraid. You have us. Mary Beth leaned toward Louie. Coming here makes it easier to bear, takes the edge off the evil, so to speak. She smiled weakly at the rest of them, as if fearing they might disagree. Helps not to bottle up the guilt inside, Kurt advised. You come here, talk, get it out. There was lots of nodding, but then Keith's angry voice broke in. I'm sick of talk. Talking doesn't make it go away. I want to stop it. This is no way to live. You can't fight it, Darrell said. So why don't we just give up and die? Asked Mary Beth. Face it, hon, you're already half dead, Dawn said. Louie hadn't noticed before how pale her skin was, how feverish her eyes. The mood turned sour, and people stared at the floor. You all know talking about dying does no good, James admonished. The only way we can fight this is to keep on living. No, Bobby Lee said. Everyone looked at him. The only real way out may be in death. People perked up. This was something new. I've been thinking about it a lot, Bobby Lee said. We should kill ourselves now, before it gets worse. It's the only thing we can still do by our own free will. Louie was mad at herself for not making her legs move. She felt like a lump of lead. But if her feet wouldn't work, her mouth could. My daddy always told me to speak straight and plain, she said. What changes are you talking about exactly? What's supposed to happen to me? They ignored her, like she wasn't even there. Bobby Lee's right, Keith was saying. Do it now, get it over with. Take charge of our own destiny. Makes a lot more sense than talking. Talking gets us nowhere. At least dying would get us someplace. Yeah, get us some peace, said Darrell. There was a moment of heavy silence, and then, to Louie's amazement, they started talking about killing themselves, as if they were planning their summer vacations. Louie found her legs at last. She stood up and tore for the door. The iron stairs thundered under her feet. She made it 2 blocks without a breath, then stopped and gasped and laughed. Crazier than a bunch of pickled goats, her dad would say. She stopped laughing and felt cold as ice for a moment, but it passed. It left her with an anxious feeling she couldn't shake. But then, she was anxious for having stayed out so long. What if Gran had come back? She ran along the deserted streets and took a shortcut through the square. A little black and white dog appeared from underneath an azalea bush and just about tripped her. Lost. Black and white older male cocker spaniel wearing red collar, Louis remembered. The dog whimpered and held up an injured paw. Louis stared at him. He wagged his tail feebly, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. "Stupid," she said, and shoved him away. The dog squealed and limped back into the shrubbery. "I'm in a hurry. No time for stupid dogs." She pounded down Grand Street. She let herself into the house. Just moments later, there was the sound of a taxi. When Gran came inside, Louis was back in a living room chair. "Have you had a nice evening, dear?" Gran asked. "Just peachy." Gran frowned. "Well then, I'm a bit tired. I think I'll turn in early tonight." Turn in permanently for all I care, Louis thought. She waited, her nose stuck in the book until she heard Gran go upstairs. Then she threw the book across the room and turned out the lamp. She sat in the dark for a long time, glaring at a thing that burned behind her eyes. It wasn't until the faint light of dawn began to seep into the room that she got up from the chair and went, cold and stiff, up to bed. Louis woke to the sound of the newspaper hitting the porch with its unassuming thump. She felt as if she had a very bad dream, or worse. She felt as if she'd done something she should be ashamed of, but she couldn't think what. For the first time since arriving at Gran's, Louis wanted to stay in bed. Maybe she was getting a cold. She felt her forehead. She sniffed a few times. Gran's quavery morning voice came wafting up the staircase. "Louis, breakfast is served." You couldn't come down in your pajamas in Gran's house. Louis hurriedly pulled on some clothes and swiped at her short hair. Gran would be sure to notice if she hadn't brushed her teeth. She grabbed a mint to suck instead. In the dining room, Gran had poured the coffee but was waiting to begin, her plate still protected by its silver warming cover. "Sorry," Louis said, and sat down to uncover her own plate. Gran gave a slight nod and began to eat. But halfway through, she put her fork down and delicately patted her lips with her napkin. "Something upsetting has happened," she announced. Louis felt a pang of guilt. Had Gran discovered she'd been out? "What?" she asked, keeping her eyes lowered. "In there," Gran said, and Louis had to look up to see the gesture toward the living room. "A terrible mess." Louis remembered throwing the book. Gran was a stickler, but this was too much. "I guess I dropped it and forgot." "What are you talking about, dear?" "My library book. I left it lying on the floor." "I didn't notice." "Well, then, what was it?" Louis got up from the table to see. "Oh, I wouldn't," Gran said, but Louis walked across the living room door, which had been pulled shut. The old wood stuck a little. She gave it a push and was about to step in. The smell stopped her. Cloying and sickly sweet, and some undercurrent of the unmentionable. Smells that shouldn't be in living rooms. Gran was behind her, pulling at the door. "Come away, you don't want to see. Some degenerate, the police said. I wouldn't let them wake you." Gran's mild face creased with concern. "Are you feeling well? You were sleeping so sound." "I didn't see anything," Louis said, aware that her voice was rising strangely. "I went to bed the usual time." "Thank goodness you did. You might have been harmed." "Was anything stolen?" Louis asked. "Nothing at all." "Something must have been stolen," Louis said. "No, they just left that mess." Gran was trying to behave like a lady. She suddenly looked much older, more fragile. Thin as glass, Mama would say, crisp as a dead leaf. Pathetic, really, Louis thought. Ugly, too. Whiskers sprouting on her chin, wrinkled up chicken neck wobbling like jello every time she talked. Louis felt like giving Gran a shove. It was a lucky thing that Clara came in, to say that Ned had arrived to clean up. Louis didn't read the newspaper that day. She spent the morning in her room, trying to push down the feeling that she had done something wrong. She regretted running away last night. She should have stuck around for the facts. She wished she could talk to Bobby Lee again. In spite of his crazy suicide idea, she trusted him most. Maybe he'd only said that to humor them. That was it, of course. Bobby Lee had just been playing a joke on that bunch of maniacs. They could have laughed together afterwards. By the afternoon, she couldn't stand it and told Gran she was going for a walk. The living room had been thoroughly cleaned, and the hall smelled of disinfectant. Gran said it was a good idea to get some fresh air. Louis retraced her steps in search of the house, worrying that it wouldn't be there, but as she rounded the corner, she saw it right away. She couldn't miss it. There was a commotion going on, police cars and an ambulance. She joined the throng rubbernecking at the curb. "What happened?" she asked no one in particular. "Man killed hisself," someone said. "Mrs. Blaine's son," said somebody else. slit his throat in the tub. Water overflowed. Blood came down into the kitchen where she was making biscuits. Ruined the biscuits! Snickers, and then solemn silence as the front door of the house opened and a woman was helped out, hunched over, sobbing, leaning on a policeman. She passed close enough for Louis to smell her perfume, even touch her. Why would he do it? She was asking. Give me one reason why. Louis melted back into the crowd, afraid the woman would see the guilty knowledge on her face. Louis went back to reading the newspaper. She woke up long before 8 o'clock, anxious for its arrival. She was dressed and ready before Clara even put the breakfast on the table. First thing, Louis turned to the funeral notices. She didn't know their last names, but she could tell by their first names and their ages. She'd already read about James Blaine. The obituary didn't mention suicide. A day later, there was one for Dawn Whittaker. Had to be her, only 17. Died suddenly and unexpectedly. Sure, Louis thought, as sudden and unexpected as a razor slicing across your throat. One morning she looked up and was startled by Gran's troubled gaze. Are you feeling all right, dear? Of course I am. Get out in the fresh air more, Gran said. Better than dwelling on morbid things. Louis felt furious. She wanted to push the whole dining room table, silver, china, crystal, and all, onto Gran. Instead, she got up and stomped out into the garden to finish reading the paper. But somehow, she never got herself past the obituaries these days. Louis thought she might be in love with Bobby Lee. Can you fall in love on such short notice? She remembered his pretty eyes and his nice smile. She hoped she wouldn't see his name in the paper one morning. That week, they picked themselves off with uncanny regularity. First James and Dawn, then Keith and Darrell. She wondered if she should tell the police to try to save the few left. But it was so crack-brained, who would believe it? Anyway, it was their business. Hadn't they wanted to remain anonymous? Suicide's anonymous, she thought, and laughed, spewing toast crumbs across the tablecloth. Something funny? Gran asked with a frown. No, Louis said rudely, and saw Gran swallow hard. You're not yourself today, dear, Gran said. I feel fine, but you haven't been sleeping well. I sleep fine. Louis glared at Gran until the old woman's gaze dropped. Then she threw the newspaper down on her unfinished plate and tramped out of the room. Okay, there were the nightmares. Louis had never been one for bad dreams, but now they came every night. Bobby Lee figured in all of them, which was why she thought she'd fallen in love, but he was different in the dreams. He said strange things. What causes your heart the most pain? He'd asked last night when they were riding on his black motorcycle. She had felt the wind sting her face and had smelled the leather of his jacket as she pressed her face into his back. What's the worst thing? He screamed at her. Come on, tell, Louis. Tell the very worst, most private thing. Louis had not answered. She had been busy trying to think of the worst when he stopped in a deserted lane. Mean brick row houses with narrow backyards, an animal foraging in the garbage cans. Use this, said Bobby Lee. The coffin-shaped handle fit easily into her hand. The massive bowie blade glinted in the light of the moon. She hefted its weight. She ran her finger down the steel, and her own blood gleamed back. It's sharp, she said. Sharp, Bobby Lee smiled. You'll do anything for me, won't you? Yes, she'd replied, breathless with the closeness of him, remembering the feel of his muscles rippling under leather. Oh, Bobby Lee, I want you to kiss me. Then kill that, he said, and pointed. Of course, it was funny that when she woke up, she actually had a cut on her left index finger, just where she dreamed she'd run her finger along the blade. And she'd been a little ashamed of those feelings and hoped, even in the dream, that she hadn't said them aloud to Bobby Lee about wanting him to kiss her. Now that she remembered it, his smile wasn't quite the dazzle she had first thought. There was something the matter with one of his teeth. Louis, I've been talking to you, Gran said in the living room that night. Louis's head felt heavy, as if it had grown too big. I was saying that tomorrow we'll get to the doctor to take a look at you. Now why don't you go up to bed? The mantel clock said a few minutes past 8. It's too early. Not for the state you're in, Gran said, her voice sounding stronger, more determined than it ever had before. It's too early, Louis cried out as if in pain, and Gran's papery face paled. I'm sorry, Louis said, suddenly feeling sly. Yes, it's time for me to sleep. Pleasant dreams, Clara said, as Louis went past her in the hall. Louis laughed. She heard Clara go in to Gran and say, Whatever's come over that child, she's changed. Louis ran up the stairs to drown out the word. She threw off her clothes and got into bed. Now it seemed urgent that she go to sleep quickly, to dream. Bobby Lee was waiting, looking cross. Louis hoped he wasn't really mad. "I'll forgive you," he said. "Maybe." "Please, Bobby Lee," Louis cooed at him, running her hands up and down his leather sleeves. "I'm sorry I couldn't do it last time. Please." He pulled away. She had to run to get on his motorcycle before he took off without her. Hanging on, they rode like the speed of night in the light of a fluorescent moon. Bobby Lee asked again, "What is your worst, most private thing?" Louis felt he might see into her heart, even when she didn't know what was there. She was afraid of him, but overwhelmed by the thrill of him. She never wanted their wild ride to stop. She closed her eyes and let herself go. "I don't care anymore," she thought. "I give. Yes, I give. I'm ready for you." She felt the thing in her hand again. She gripped it hard to the hilt. "Do it for me," said Bobby Lee. "My worst thing," Louis thought. "The thing that makes my heart hurt. My private mind has been invaded, and I am complying, not minding. I am going, not retreating. I am doing it." She could feel the rush of blood on her fingers, warm and thick. The smell of it made the salt in her own mouth twinge. If only there wasn't this horrible bleat of dying. "Good?" Bobby Lee asked, his voice hoarse and urgent. "I'm not sure," Louis said. Bobby Lee was cross, but he laughed, bitter laugh. Long, piercing scream of a laugh that cracked the face of the moon, skidded them around a corner, and threw Louis off the bike. She landed hard, heard herself make a sound like oof. She opened her eyes, flinched at the raw smell of sweat on her. The dream scream went on and on, until she realized it was coming from downstairs. She threw on her robe and ran, and wondered at how her shoulders ached as she clutched the banister. Graham was standing at the door between the kitchen and dining room, a bony, white-knuckled hand pressed to her mouth. The outside kitchen door was open, and through it Louis could see Clara in the garden, hands covering her eyes, walking blindly through Ned's neat borders, as if trying to run away. On the stove, a big, black iron soup pot was bubbling. It had always been stored in a cellar, a relic of a bygone era, big enough to soak a whole hog. But there it was, chortling away, its lid dancing and escaping steam. A tantalizing smell wafted out, like roasting oranges and fatback pork. Louis walked over and lifted the lid. When she looked into the dog's eyes, boiled away now to a white glaze, she knew. Her private heart had been cracked open, the knowledge that was in her sore shoulders, on her stained hands. She had no time for retching or crying. With strength she didn't know she had, she lifted the pot clear off the flame and carried it outside. Steam rose up to sear her eyes, but she moved on, walking the thing down to the bottom of the garden where she threw it on the compost heap. She helped Clara back inside. She sat Grant down in a dining room chair. She didn't mind the pain of blisters forming on her scalded hands. There was a promise of healing goodness in it. She expected the pounding that came on the door. "I'll get it. It's for me." He was standing there, a twinkling in his green eyes, one brown tooth in his dazzling smile. He lifted his white hat. "I've come calling," he said. She blinked and he was Bobby Lee. Blinked and he was the man on the train again. "Got 'em all except you," he said genially. "Time to go now." "I'm not going," Louis said. She could almost hear him saying it. "Oh, yes, you are." "See, it's this way," Louis began in a conversational tone. "I just remembered. When I took that lollipop outside, when all my relatives were busy talking, I unwrapped the pretty red paper. I put that lollipop to my lips, and I gave it one good lick. But Mama came out then and saw what I was doing. She grabbed me and gave me the whipping of my life." "You hated her for that," he said, leering. "Sure I did. That's why I forgot. But see, I never ate the lollipop. Mama threw it away." It unsettled him, made him look angry but helpless at the same time. "So I don't have to go with you now," Louis said, slowly closing the door on him. "'Cause I only had a little taste of death." This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of A Little Taste of Death by Patricia Windsor. Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and thank you for joining me for my production of A Little Taste of Death by Patricia Windsor. This was a very weird story. It looks like Bobby Lee and the man on the train, or whoever he was when he appeared to all the children, the guy that handed out that lollipop, he was probably Death. And he appeared in whatever form the children needed to see in order for them to accept the lollipop, consume it, and then that was a placeholder, I guess, so Death could come calling whenever he wanted to. I don't know what the deal was with the dog being boiled in the end. I don't know if Clara did it. I don't know if Louis did it in her sleep, but I doubt it because she was having all those dreams about Bobby Lee, which is really Death, or whatever that creature was that was killing all the children. You know, there's a lot of unknown stuff here. It's a supernatural story to be sure, but I'm not sure exactly what's going on. It's all over the place. The thing with Gran being very specific about how the napkin is placed and the newspaper is placed, that could just be an OCD style thing, or her personality, or she's very particular about how things are done because there's nothing really going on in her life. But this deal with going to see the kids and the newspaper ad, all that stuff feels like a setup, but I'm not sure for what. There's a lot here that I need to think on. I wouldn't mind reading this again just to try to figure out exactly what's happening. This is sort of like an R.L. Stine novel where he tells you who the killer is or who done it in the beginning of the novel, but you have to read between the lines in order to see that setup. This feels a lot like that. I like how clever the story is, and I would read more Patricia Windsor again if I can just figure out what she's trying to say in this story. So what should I read next? I don't know. Send me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm also at home right here on YouTube, at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the join button to show your support. Any help is greatly appreciated. I really do mean that. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales of horror. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.